some moments change everything. A split second where assumptions crumble, where power shifts, and where the truth cuts through years of prejudice like a blade through paper. This is the story of General Marcus Thompson, a decorated military officer who thought he knew everything about respect and honor, until he encountered a young woman whose quiet strength would shake the very foundations of his beliefs. In a crowded military ceremony, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, the general made a decision that would haunt him forever. He saw what he expected to see, judged what he thought he understood, and acted on assumptions that had no place in a world where true heroes often wear unexpected faces. But, sometimes, the universe has a way of teaching us the most important lessons in the most public ways possible. And, sometimes, a small metal badge carries more weight than all the stars on a general's uniform. This is that story. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's parade ground as hundreds of military personnel gathered for the annual Medal of Honor ceremony. General Marcus Thompson stood at attention on the elevated platform, his chest heavy with ribbons and medals that told the story of 35 years of distinguished service. His steely gray eyes surveyed the crowd with the practiced gaze of a man who had commanded respect on 3 different continents. At 62, Thompson was everything a military general should be. Tall, imposing, with silver hair cropped to regulation length and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. His reputation preceded him wherever he went. The soldiers called him Iron Marcus behind his back, though never with disrespect. He had earned every star on his shoulder through blood, sweat, and an unwavering dedication to military protocol. Today's ceremony was particularly special. 3 recipients would receive the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded for acts of valor in combat. Thompson had personally reviewed each case file, each recommendation, each witness statement. These were men who had gone above and beyond, who had risked everything for their fellow soldiers. In his mind, this was what the military was all about: brotherhood, sacrifice, and honor. The crowd began to settle as the ceremony commenced. Thompson's aide, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, handed him the folder containing the details of each recipient. He glanced through it one final time, though he had memorized every detail days ago. Sergeant First Class Michael Rodriguez, who had saved 12 soldiers from an IED explosion in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant David Kim, who had single-handedly held off an enemy assault for 6 hours while his unit evacuated civilians. And Sergeant James Wilson, who had carried 3 wounded comrades to safety under heavy enemy fire. As the first 2 recipients were called forward, Thompson felt the familiar surge of pride that came with these moments. This was why he had dedicated his life to the military. These young men represented everything good about service, everything noble about sacrifice. The crowd applauded respectfully as Rodriguez and Kim stepped forward to receive their medals, their families beaming from the front row. But, as Thompson prepared to call the third name, something caught his eye that made his blood pressure spike. Near the back of the formation, a young woman was checking her phone. Not only was she checking her phone during a Medal of Honor ceremony, but she was wearing civilian clothes. A simple white t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she looked like she had wandered onto the base by accident. Thompson's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of disrespect that made his skin crawl. Here they were, honoring the bravest of the brave, and this girl couldn't even put her phone away for 30 minutes. Worse yet, she was clearly not military personnel, which meant someone had brought a guest who didn't understand the gravity of the situation. He caught the eye of Sergeant Major Williams, his most trusted non-commissioned officer, and nodded toward the girl. Williams followed his gaze and immediately understood. The sergeant major began making his way through the crowd, but Thompson was already seething. The disrespect was too blatant to ignore. "Excuse me," Thompson's voice boomed across the parade ground, amplified by the microphone clipped to his uniform. The entire ceremony ground to a halt. Hundreds of heads turned to see what had caught the general's attention. "Young lady in the back." "Yes, you with the phone." The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were wide, and Thompson could see a flash of what looked like fear cross her face. Good, he thought. Maybe now she would understand where she was and what was happening. "This is a Medal of Honor ceremony," Thompson continued, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in command. "The highest honor our nation can bestow on its heroes. Perhaps you could show some respect and put that device away." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some soldiers looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Others nodded in approval. Thompson had always been known for his no-nonsense approach to military protocol, and this was clearly a teaching moment. The girl immediately put her phone in her pocket, her cheeks flushing red. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice barely audible across the distance. But Thompson wasn't finished. The disrespect had already been shown, and, in his experience, letting these things slide was how discipline broke down. "I don't think you understand the significance of where you are right now," he continued. "These men being honored today put their lives on the line for this country. The least you can do is show some basic respect." The silence on the parade ground was deafening. Every person in attendance was holding their breath, waiting to see how this would unfold. Thompson's aide, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The general's word was law during these ceremonies. Furthermore, Thompson continued, warming to his theme, "I'm not sure how you got onto this base without proper clearance, but civilian guests are expected to follow military protocol. This isn't a social event. This is a solemn ceremony honoring American heroes." The girl's face had gone from red to pale. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Several people in the crowd were now looking away, clearly uncomfortable with the public dressing down. But Thompson felt justified. Respect was earned through discipline, and discipline came from holding everyone to the highest standards. "I apologize, General," the girl said, her voice stronger this time but still shaking slightly. "It won't happen again." Thompson nodded curtly. "See that it doesn't." He turned back to the podium, satisfied that he had made his point. The ceremony could continue, and everyone present had learned an important lesson about respect and protocol. But, as he looked down at his notes to call the final recipient, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Sergeant James Wilson. According to the file, Wilson had requested that his sister be present for the ceremony. His sister, who had flown in from California. His sister, who had been caring for their disabled mother while Wilson served overseas. His sister, who had been using her phone to coordinate medical care for their mother during the ceremony. Thompson's hands began to shake slightly as he read the next line in Wilson's file. The line he had somehow missed during his earlier review. Wilson's sister, Emma, was not just a civilian guest. She was a veteran herself. A former Navy medic who had served 2 tours in Iraq before being medically discharged after an IED explosion had left her with traumatic brain injury and partial hearing loss. The general's throat went dry as he continued reading. Emma Wilson had been awarded the Purple Heart for her service. She had saved dozens of lives during her deployment, working tirelessly in field hospitals under constant enemy fire. The phone she had been checking wasn't for social media or casual conversation. It was connected to a medical alert system for their 73-year-old mother, who was recovering from a stroke. Thompson looked up from the file, his eyes searching the crowd for the young woman he had just humiliated in front of hundreds of people. She was still standing in the same spot, but now he could see what he had missed before. What he had been too quick to judge, too ready to condemn. There, pinned to her white t-shirt, was a small metal badge. A Purple Heart. The same decoration that hung on his own chest, earned through his own blood and sacrifice. The same honor that marked her as a wounded warrior, a hero who had given more than most people could imagine. As the full weight of his mistakes settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket, General Marcus Thompson realized that he had just committed the most shameful act of his entire military career. He had humiliated a Purple Heart recipient in front of her brother's Medal of Honor ceremony. He had questioned the patriotism and respect of a woman who had bled for her country. And, worst of all, he had done it publicly, in front of hundreds of witnesses, at the most sacred ceremony the military could offer. The microphone in his hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The stars on his shoulders felt like they were burning through his uniform. For the first time in his 35-year career, General Marcus Thompson had absolutely no idea what to do next. The ceremony had to continue. Sergeant Wilson was waiting for his moment of recognition. But the general's mistake hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, poisoning everything it touched. The crowd was still silent, still waiting, still watching to see how their commanding officer would handle what was quickly becoming the most uncomfortable moment in Fort Braxton's history. Thompson cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. But his voice, which had commanded soldiers across 3 decades, came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sergeant James Wilson, please step forward." As Wilson began making his way toward the platform, Thompson's eyes found Emma Wilson again. She was watching her brother with pride and love, but the general could see the way her shoulders sagged. Could see the hurt in her posture. Could see exactly what his words had done to a woman who deserved nothing but honor and respect. The ceremony would continue, but everything had changed. And General Marcus Thompson was about to learn that some mistakes can't be undone with military efficiency. Some wounds can't be healed with protocol and procedure. And, sometimes, the most important lessons come from the moments when everything you thought you knew crumbles around you like a house of cards in a hurricane. As Sergeant Wilson reached the platform and snapped to attention, Thompson realized that this ceremony would be remembered not for the heroes being honored, but for the moment when a general forgot the most important lesson the military teaches: respect is earned, not demanded, and true honor comes from recognizing it in others, not from the rank on your collar. The next few minutes would test every principle Thompson had built his career on. And the young woman standing quietly in the back, wearing her Purple Heart like a badge of courage, was about to teach him more about honor than he had learned in 3.5 decades of service. As Sergeant James Wilson stood at attention before him, General Thompson tried to focus on the words he had rehearsed dozens of times. But his concentration was shattered. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted to the back of the formation where Emma Wilson stood, the Purple Heart on her chest catching the morning sunlight like a beacon of his shame. "Sergeant Wilson," Thompson began, his voice carrying across the parade ground despite the turmoil in his mind, "you are being recognized today for extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy fire." The words felt hollow now, mechanical, stripped of the passion and reverence he usually brought to these moments. As Thompson began reading Wilson's citation, the details of that terrible day in Afghanistan came alive. Wilson's squad had been ambushed while escorting supplies to a remote outpost. 3 soldiers had been wounded immediately by sniper fire, pinned down in an open area with no cover. While enemy bullets flew overhead, Wilson had crawled nearly 200 yards through hostile terrain, making 3 separate trips to carry each wounded soldier to safety. Displaying complete disregard for his own safety, Thompson continued, "Sergeant Wilson exposed himself to enemy fire for over an hour, refusing to leave any man behind." The irony of those words wasn't lost on him. Wilson had refused to leave anyone behind, while Thompson had just left a fellow veteran behind in the most public way possible. The crowd was listening intently now, caught up in the heroism being described. But Thompson could feel the tension still lingering from his earlier outburst. Several officers kept glancing between him and Emma Wilson, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez stood rigidly beside him, her jaw tight with what Thompson now recognized as disapproval. As he pinned the Medal of Honor to Wilson's chest, Thompson whispered, "Your country is proud of you, son." Wilson's response was a crisp "Thank you, sir," but Thompson caught something else in the young man's eyes. A coolness that hadn't been there before. Wilson had witnessed the humiliation of his sister, and the pride in his moment was tainted by what had happened. The official photography began, and Thompson posed with Wilson as cameras flashed. But his mind was racing through everything he knew about Emma Wilson from the file. 26 years old. Navy Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class. Deployed to Iraq twice between 2019 and 2022. Saved dozens of lives in field hospitals and forward aid stations. The details that really cut through him were in the final paragraph of her service record. Emma had been riding in a medical convoy when an improvised explosive device had detonated directly beneath their vehicle. 3 soldiers had died instantly. Emma had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, internal bleeding, and partial hearing loss. Despite her injuries, she had crawled from the wreckage and treated 2 other wounded soldiers until medical evacuation arrived. She had been 24 years old. After the explosion, Emma had spent 8 months in various military hospitals, undergoing surgery and rehabilitation. The traumatic brain injury had left her with memory issues, difficulty processing loud noises, and occasional seizures. She had been medically retired from the Navy with full honors, but Thompson knew that medical retirement was often military speak for too broken to serve anymore. And now she was here, taking care of their mother while her brother served, checking her phone not out of disrespect but out of responsibility. The phone calls and messages weren't social distractions, they were lifelines to a woman who depended on her daughter's vigilance. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Thompson watched Emma Wilson move toward the platform. She walked with purpose, but he noticed a slight hesitation in her step, a barely perceptible pause that spoke to someone dealing with ongoing medical issues. When she reached her brother, her smile was radiant, but Thompson could see the effort it took to maintain her composure. Wilson embraced his sister, and Thompson heard him whisper, "I'm so sorry, Em." That was completely out of line. Emma's response was quieter, but Thompson caught enough of it to make his guilt deepen further. "Don't worry about me, Jimmy. This is your day. I'm so proud of you." That was when Thompson knew he had to act. 35 years of military service had taught him many things, but perhaps the most important was that some mistakes require immediate action to correct. He couldn't let this moment pass without addressing what had happened. He stepped down from the platform, his aide close behind. "Lieutenant Colonel Martinez," he said quietly, "please clear the area around the Wilson family. I need a moment." Martinez nodded, but her expression made it clear she thought this was long overdue. She began directing the other ceremony attendees away, giving Thompson the space he needed for what would be either the most important conversation of his career or the final nail in its coffin. As Thompson approached the Wilson siblings, conversation around them gradually died. Emma looked up and saw him coming, and, for a moment, Thompson thought she might flee. Her face went pale, and he could see her shoulders tense. But she stood her ground, meeting his gaze with a mixture of apprehension and defiance that reminded him of every brave soldier he had ever commanded. "Sergeant Wilson," Thompson said formally, "congratulations again on your recognition today. Would it be possible for me to speak with you and your sister privately?" Wilson's expression was carefully neutral, but Thompson could see the protective instinct in his posture as he moved slightly closer to Emma. "Of course, sir," Wilson replied, though his tone suggested it was anything but a request. Thompson gestured toward a small pavilion near the edge of the parade ground, away from the dispersing crowd. As they walked, he noticed Emma's slight limp, another reminder of the price she had paid for her service. The silence between them was heavy with unresolved tension. Once they reached the pavilion, Thompson turned to face them both. For a moment, the words he had rehearsed during the walkover completely abandoned him. How do you apologize for questioning someone's patriotism when they bled for their country? How do you explain that your prejudice had blinded you to their sacrifice? "Ms. Wilson," he began, then stopped. The formality felt wrong, inadequate for what he needed to say. "Emma," he started again, using her first name deliberately. "I owe you an apology that no words can adequately express." Emma's expression remained guarded, but she nodded for him to continue. "I made assumptions today that were not only wrong but completely unacceptable," Thompson continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse. "I saw what I expected to see instead of taking the time to understand the situation. That failure is entirely mine, and it goes against everything I've tried to stand for in my career." He paused, gathering himself for the hardest part. "I didn't know about your service record when I spoke to you earlier. That's not an excuse, it's simply context for how deeply I've failed both as an officer and as a human being. What I've learned about your sacrifice, your service, and your ongoing dedication to your family makes my behavior this morning inexcusable." Emma's expression began to soften slightly, but Thompson could see she wasn't ready to let him off the hook yet. Good, he thought. She shouldn't make this easy for him. "I read your service record," he continued. 2 tours in Iraq. Purple Heart recipient. Lives saved under fire. And here you are, taking care of your mother while your brother serves, dealing with the ongoing effects of your injuries, and I humiliated you for staying connected to her medical care." Thompson's voice cracked slightly on the last words. In his peripheral vision, he could see several officers and NCOs watching from a respectful distance. Word of this conversation would spread throughout the base within hours. His reputation, built over decades, was being reshaped in real time. "General," Emma said quietly, her voice still carrying the slight hoarseness that resulted from her injuries, "I appreciate your apology. I really do. But what hurt me most wasn't being called out for using my phone. It was having my respect for this ceremony questioned." She gestured toward the medal still pinned to her brother's chest. "I would never disrespect something like this. My phone was connected to a medical alert system for my mother. She had a stroke 6 weeks ago, and the doctor said to watch for signs of another one. I wasn't texting friends or scrolling social media. I was making sure my mother was still alive." The simplicity of her explanation hit Thompson like a physical blow. Every assumption he had made, every judgment he had passed, crumbled in the face of her quiet dignity. "I know you didn't know my situation," Emma continued, "but you didn't ask, either. You saw a young woman in civilian clothes and decided I didn't belong here. You assumed I didn't understand the significance of what was happening. But I've been to these ceremonies before, General. I've been honored at these ceremonies before." She touched the purple heart on her chest, and Thompson noticed for the first time that her hand trembled slightly. Another reminder of the blast that had changed her life forever. "I understand why you reacted the way you did," she said, and Thompson was amazed by the grace in her voice. "Military protocol is important. Respect for ceremony matters. But so does understanding that service comes in many forms, and sacrifice doesn't always wear a uniform." Sergeant Wilson had remained silent during this exchange, but Thompson could see the fierce pride in his eyes as he watched his sister handle the situation with more dignity than the general had shown all morning. "You're right," Thompson said simply. "About all of it. I let my assumptions override my judgment, and I humiliated a fellow veteran in front of hundreds of people. There's no excuse for that, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the magnitude of my mistake." Emma studied his face for a long moment, and Thompson found himself being evaluated by someone who had seen enough of life and death to know sincerity when she encountered it. "I do forgive you, General," she said finally. "Not because you apologized, though I appreciate that you did. I forgive you because holding on to anger about this would dishonor my brother's moment and everything this ceremony represents." The grace of her response left Thompson speechless. Here was a woman who had every right to be angry, every justification for making his public humiliation as painful as possible, and instead she was choosing the higher road. But Emma wasn't finished. "However," she continued, and Thompson braced himself for the consequences he knew he deserved, "I hope you'll remember this the next time you see someone who doesn't fit your expectations. Service and sacrifice come in all shapes and sizes. Some of us just carry our scars on the inside." As she spoke these last words, Thompson realized that Emma Wilson had just given him a lesson in leadership that was worth more than all the military academies and staff colleges he had ever attended. She had shown him what true strength looked like, what real honor meant, and how a person could maintain their dignity even in the face of unjust treatment. The conversation was clearly coming to an end, but Thompson knew that its impact would last far longer than the ceremony itself. As they prepared to rejoin Wilson's family for the post-ceremony reception, Thompson made a decision that would surprise everyone who thought they knew him. This wasn't just going to be a private apology. If he had humiliated Emma Wilson publicly, then his acknowledgement of her service and his mistake needed to be equally public. The question was whether she would allow him the chance to make it right, or if some wounds were too deep to heal with words alone. The next few hours would determine not just how this story ended, but what kind of leader General Marcus Thompson would be remembered as when his own career came to a close. The reception following the Medal of Honor ceremony was held in the base's main dining facility, which had been decorated with patriotic bunting and photographs of previous Medal of Honor recipients. The atmosphere should have been celebratory, filled with the pride and camaraderie that marked such special occasions. Instead, an undercurrent of tension flowed through the room like an electric charge. General Thompson moved through the reception with his usual military bearing, but those who knew him well could see the change. His smile seemed forced, his conversations stilted. Word of his confrontation with Emma Wilson and their subsequent private conversation had spread through the military community with the speed that only gossip achieves in closed environments. Emma Wilson sat at a corner table with her brother's wife, Maria, and their 2 young children. She had changed from her simple white t-shirt into a navy blue dress that was more appropriate for the formal reception, but she had kept the purple heart pinned to her chest. Thompson noticed that several officers had approached their table throughout the evening, paying their respects to both Wilson and his sister. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez appeared at Thompson's side as he watched the Wilson family from across the room. "Sir," she said quietly, "there's something you should know. Word about what happened this morning has reached Division Command. General Harrison's office called about an hour ago." Thompson's stomach tightened. General Robert Harrison was his superior, a man known for his zero-tolerance approach to public relations disasters. If this incident had reached division level, Thompson's career could be over before the sun set. "What did they say?" Thompson asked, keeping his voice level despite the anxiety building in his chest. "They're concerned about potential media attention," Martinez replied. "Apparently, several people recorded parts of the ceremony on their phones. There's already some social media chatter about a general humiliating a Purple Heart recipient." The weight of modern communication hit Thompson like a sledgehammer. In the old days, military ceremonies were private affairs, witnessed only by those in attendance. Now, a single cell phone video could turn a personal mistake into a national scandal. He had humiliated Emma Wilson in front of hundreds of people, but technology meant that hundreds could become hundreds of thousands, or even millions. "Sir," Martinez continued, "I took the liberty of reviewing the base's social media policy. If this goes viral, we'll need to address it directly. The Army doesn't ignore these things anymore." Thompson nodded grimly. The military had learned harsh lessons about the power of social media in recent years. Incidents that might once have been handled quietly now required immediate, transparent responses. The question was whether he could get ahead of this story or if it would control him. As if summoned by his thoughts, his phone buzzed with a text message from General Harrison's aide. "Division Commander requests immediate call. Urgent." Thompson excused himself from the reception and walked to a quiet corridor outside the dining facility. His hands were steadier now than they had been during the ceremony, but the weight of accountability settled on his shoulders as he dialed Harrison's direct line. "Marcus," Harrison's voice was clipped and professional, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Did you publicly reprimand a Purple Heart recipient at this morning's ceremony?" There was no point in sugarcoating the truth. "Yes, sir, I did. I made a serious error in judgment, and I've already apologized privately to the individual involved." A long pause followed, and Thompson could hear Harrison's frustration even through the phone. "Marcus, we've got 3 videos of this incident already posted online. The story is spreading faster than we can track it. I need to know exactly what happened and what you're planning to do about it." Thompson gave his superior a complete account of the morning's events, from his initial reaction to Emma's phone use through their private conversation afterward. He left nothing out, including the details of Emma's service record and the medical situation that had necessitated her phone monitoring. When he finished, Harrison was quiet for nearly a minute. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. "Jesus, Marcus. Of all the people to dress down publicly, you picked a Purple Heart recipient who was monitoring her sick mother while attending her brother's Medal of Honor ceremony?" "Yes, sir. I have no excuse for my actions." "No, you don't," Harrison agreed bluntly. "But the question now is how we handle this. The story is already out there, and it's not going away. We can either get ahead of it with a meaningful response, or we can let it control the narrative about our military's values." Thompson knew what was coming next. "What are you recommending, sir?" "I'm recommending that you make this right, publicly and completely. Not because of the media attention, though that matters, but because it's the right thing to do. That young woman deserves better than a private apology for a public humiliation. As Thompson ended the call with Harrison, he realized that the path forward was clear, even if it would be personally painful. He walked back into the reception, his mind already working through what he needed to do. Emma Wilson was standing near the memorial wall, studying the photographs of fallen soldiers. Her brother was beside her, pointing out someone he had known during his deployment. Thompson approached them slowly, aware that every conversation in the nearby area would stop once people realized what was happening. "Excuse me," Thompson said quietly. "Emma, James, would you mind if I addressed the room for a moment?" Emma's eyes widened slightly. She clearly hadn't expected this. "General, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," Thompson interrupted gently. "What I did this morning was public. What I need to say should be public too, if you're willing to let me." Emma exchanged a look with her brother, who nodded slowly. "Okay," she said quietly. Thompson walked to the front of the dining facility, where a small microphone was set up near the head table. The room gradually quieted as people realized he was preparing to speak. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez moved closer, her expression showing both support and apprehension. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson began, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "I need to address something that happened during this morning's ceremony." The silence was complete now. Every person in the room was focused on what was clearly going to be an unusual moment in military protocol. "This morning, I made a serious error in judgment," Thompson continued. "I publicly reprimanded a young woman for using her phone during our Medal of Honor ceremony. I assumed that her actions showed disrespect for the proceedings and for the heroes we were honoring." He paused, gathering himself for what he knew would be the most difficult speech of his career. "I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. The woman I confronted was Emma Wilson, sister of today's Medal of Honor recipient. Emma is herself a Purple Heart recipient, wounded while serving as a Navy medic in Iraq. She was using her phone to monitor a medical alert system for her mother, who is recovering from a stroke." A murmur ran through the room as the full scope of Thompson's mistake became clear to those who hadn't already heard the details. "I saw what I expected to see instead of taking the time to understand the situation," Thompson continued, his voice growing stronger as he faced his mistake head-on. "I let my assumptions about age, gender, and civilian clothing override my judgment as an officer and as a human being." He turned to look directly at Emma, who was standing near the back of the room with tears in her eyes. Emma Wilson served her country with distinction in Iraq, saving countless lives under enemy fire. She was wounded by an IED explosion that killed 3 of her fellow soldiers. She suffers from traumatic brain injury and partial hearing loss as a result of her service. She is currently the primary caregiver for her disabled mother while her brother serves our nation. Thompson's voice cracked slightly on the next words. "She is everything we aspire to be as service members. Selfless, dedicated, and committed to putting others before herself. And I humiliated her publicly because I couldn't see past my own prejudices." The room was absolutely silent. Several people were wiping their eyes, and Thompson could see nods of approval from some of the senior officers present. "I've apologized to Emma privately, and she has shown me grace that I don't deserve," Thompson continued. "But a public wrong requires a public acknowledgement. Emma Wilson is a hero who has sacrificed more for this country than most of us will ever be asked to give. She deserves our respect, our gratitude, and our recognition." Thompson gestured for Emma to join him at the front of the room. She hesitated for a moment, then walked forward with her characteristic slight limp, her brother beside her for support. When she reached the microphone, Thompson turned to face her directly. "Emma Wilson, on behalf of the United States Army and, personally, I want to thank you for your service and apologize for my inexcusable behavior this morning. Your sacrifice, your service, and your ongoing dedication to your family represent the very best of American values." The room erupted in applause, but Thompson wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said, and the room quieted again. "I've spoken with Division Command, and we would like to formally recognize your service with a ceremony of your own, if you're willing. Your Purple Heart was earned in service to this nation, and it deserves the same recognition we give to all our wounded warriors." Emma's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Thompson, then at her brother, then at the room full of military personnel who were giving her a standing ovation. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice barely carrying over the continued applause. "Thank you for seeing me." Those 4 words hit Thompson harder than any reprimand from his superiors could have. "Thank you for seeing me." In her simple statement was everything he had failed to do that morning, everything he needed to remember going forward. As the reception continued around them, Thompson found himself in conversation after conversation with officers and enlisted personnel who wanted to share their own stories of assumptions they had made, prejudices they had overcome, and lessons they had learned about looking beyond the surface. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez approached him near the end of the evening. "Sir," she said quietly, "I wanted you to know that General Harrison called again. The social media response to your speech has been overwhelmingly positive. The videos of your apology are being shared more than the original incident." Thompson nodded, but he realized that the public response wasn't what mattered most to him anymore. What mattered was the look of relief and validation he had seen in Emma Wilson's eyes when he publicly acknowledged her service and sacrifice. 3 weeks later, Emma Wilson stood once again on Fort Braxton's parade ground, this time as the guest of honor at a formal recognition ceremony. She wore her navy dress blues, her purple heart prominent among her ribbons. General Thompson was there, not as the primary speaker, but as one of many officers who had come to pay their respects to a warrior whose service had nearly been overlooked. As Thompson watched Emma receive the recognition she had always deserved, he reflected on the lessons of that day 3 weeks earlier. He had learned that leadership wasn't about maintaining authority through intimidation, but about having the courage to admit mistakes and make them right. He had learned that service comes in many forms, and that assumptions are the enemy of understanding. Most importantly, he had learned that true honor isn't found in the rank on your collar or the ribbons on your chest, but in how you treat others, especially when you have the power to treat them poorly. The ceremony concluded with Emma Wilson receiving a formal commendation for her service and an invitation to speak at future military events about the ongoing needs of wounded warriors. As she stepped down from the platform, she caught Thompson's eye and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. In that simple gesture, Thompson saw forgiveness, respect, and the kind of grace that can't be taught in any military academy. Emma Wilson had given him more than absolution for his mistake. She had given him a masterclass in dignity, honor, and what it truly means to serve others. Later that evening, as Thompson reviewed the day's events in his office, he drafted a new addition to the base's protocol manual. It was a simple directive, but one that he hoped would prevent future officers from making the same mistake he had made. Before making assumptions about any individual's commitment to military values, the new protocol read, "Take the time to understand their story. Service and sacrifice come in many forms, and our responsibility as leaders is to recognize and honor all of them." It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes, Thompson had learned, the most important changes begin with the smallest acknowledgments of our own failures and the courage to do better next time. The story of General Thompson and Emma Wilson spread throughout the military community and beyond, becoming a teaching tool in leadership courses and a reminder that the uniform doesn't make the hero, the heart does. And sometimes, the most important lessons about honor and respect come from the moments when we fail to show them ourselves.